Xylea and Lisa and I have worked on multiple CVG partner firm rebranding and brand refresh projects together. So we've been through this several times. We're excited to talk to you today about what we've learned and observed and some of the work that we've done. Additionally, we've also worked in-house in architecture firms, so we're bringing that perspective as well. And I've done 2 extensive rebrands while working in-house for a small architecture firm. And I know Xylea's had a similar experience as well. And then Lisa has been on the graphic design side of several of those types of projects. So we're bringing both consulting and an in-house perspective to this conversation about branding. Yeah.
So yes, first we're going to just define our terms and talk about what branding is, what branding can do for you, and what it cannot do. So first of all, a strong brand is a promise that represents what you're offering your clients and what kind of experience they can expect from working with you. Your brand is ultimately who your clients think you are. Next slide, please. So the many elements that can make up a successful brand include your mission statement, which is what you do and why you do it. All other messaging you use to describe your firm and your work. Your visual identity, including your logo, website, graphic design, and all your marketing collateral. Your clients' experience, what your clients experience when they visit your office or work with you and your team. It's your reputation, and it also includes your firm culture. So it is all of these factors, both tangible and intangible, that encompasses your brand. And if they're not all working together properly, it can result in a slightly weaker brand. So for example, you can have a really strong logo and visual identity, but if you have a bunch of typos on your website, it can imply a sense of sloppiness and unprofessionalism, and it can dilute your brand. So this is what a brand can do. A brand can speak in your absence. It can increase recognition and memorability of your brand name. It can enable people to implicitly understand your core firm values. It can help potential clients envision what the experience will be like to work with your firm and your team. It can improve talent recruitment, and it can even increase your firm valuation. Next slide. However, even the best, strongest brand cannot do everything for you. So even if you have a very solid visual identity, the branding can only go so far. So it cannot replace business development activities. It cannot change unproductive behaviors, and it cannot mend a struggling partnership. So the reason why we want to bring this up is we want to really help you be aware of what a brand can and can't do so you can avoid these pitfalls. So if you're embarking on branding work, you want to make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. And during the following case studies, we'll discuss things to look out for so you can create a solid and effective brand for your firm. So Lisa?
Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa. I've been working with CVG since the very beginning. And so it's been about 5 years, I believe. And throughout that time, we've kind of worked on everything from complete and total brand refreshes. So changing of the name, new logos, new website, redoing everything with branding, to smaller just brand refreshes and just simply website refreshes. So we've really worked on, we've been very flexible, I should say, with all of our firms in terms of what we feel like they need. So today we're going to share 3 different examples of complete and total from renaming all the way to rebranding. The first one is EDI. EDI, their name was Environmental Dynamics Incorporated. Is that what the ink stands for? Okay. And they went by EDI, and they really felt like the name was outdated. It wasn't really working for them. They're a very innovative and forward-thinking group firm in New Mexico, and they just felt like this name was holding them back from this kind of more fun and passionate group of people that they felt that they were. So Emily worked really hard with them to come up with a new name, and we landed on Equiterra, regenerative design, Equiterra for short, and that was a name that you guys really kind of made up together, and And yeah, I think that, I think we can go to the next slide. So this was the original identity. And you can see it just kind of wasn't, it wasn't really reflecting kind of the modern personality that they felt they had. So on the left is the direction that we came up with. And to give a very brief summary, we had this idea that the Equiterra team is incredibly sustainable focused, and they use these materials, especially, you know, living in New Mexico and in these places where the landscape was really what motivated a lot of their design. So we wanted to use their name as a lens for the world that they see around them. And the reason why I give that background is because here you see Equiterra and it looks very simple, but you can see there's kind of a texture in the background. And the idea is much larger, and I think that it's really valuable to have that kind of strategy going into it, because in the following slides, you can go to the next one, you can see that we came up with a lot of ideas around this concept. One of which was the color palette. Instead of doing standard hex codes, we used the materials that they work with. And so the blue wasn't just a regular blue, it was the color of water. And a green wasn't just the green, it was a landscape of the trees that are found in New Mexico. It wasn't just orange, it was kind of the rock that is used in that area. The icon mark symbolizes, you know, it's a subtle nod to that lens. We, just coming from like the creative graphic design standpoint, I don't think that when you have a really large concept like this, that it needs to be overly in your face all the time. I think that it can just be a subtle nod. And with this icon mark that was also the Q in the name Equiterra, that we're kind of sharing, it gives a feeling of balance and holistic. And we can also kind of slightly nod to this lens idea. So moving on to the next slide, we took this a step further, and this is an example of kind of a collateral packet that we also used for their business cards. The idea was that we would actually punch out the name Equiterra. And so whereas on the first page where you see the kind of more static version of their logo, here we wanted to like take it a step further, and you would actually use the card as a lens and the name would be punched out. And so again, you're kind of looking at the world through their branding, their brand. I think that I was going to mention that in the first slide where you see like a very static version of their logo, I think that you always need to have that as well, because there's going to be times where you have to submit your logo to a magazine and be a sponsor or something like that, and you're not going to be able to always convey this idea, these larger ideas you have about who you are as a brand. But in ways you can incorporate it in different ways, and it's also important that you have a strong concept, because you can always build upon it. So one thing that we in the initial brainstorming, when we were all very excited about this idea, is we had so many ideas of where this could go. We could, film, using their work and kind of zoom in on their materials and then slowly zoom out. And their name is kind of, again, that lens that is constantly reinforcing that idea. However, between like time and budget constraints, that's not always going to be the case. Okay, sorry, I need to move a little faster. So then onto the website, this is an interactive video that isn't moving currently, but if you go to the website, you'll see that it's actually just a very slow transformation of different elements of the earth, and it's a very slow moving, once again, reinforcing this idea that the advancing architecture of place using these elements. So this is an example kind of, again, of what Xylea was saying, that it's not just about the logo mark. If we had just shown you the logo mark without showing how we really kind of, we brought it into every idea and every single piece that we created for them, down to the messaging that Xylea and Emily worked on to reinforce this idea. So it's not just about the graphical logo mark. Next one is Cube to Thoughtcraft. Cube was running up against another firm in their marketplace. They were, I think there was also another Cube that was a competitor, and they also, with their branding, they didn't feel like it was communicating their thoughtfulness and precision. So again, Emily worked and Xylea worked really hard with them to come up with Thoughtcraft, which if we go to the next slide, we can see that this one is a much simpler design in comparison to, or I shouldn't say it's more simple, it's Thoughtcraft, the name itself really mattered so much to them, and there was so much care and craft that went into creating that name, that throughout the process of the logo design, we tried to kind of incorporate different graphical elements of kind of conveying the words Thoughtcraft. And then we just decided that we didn't need to add graphical elements. The name itself and the font itself conveyed what we were trying to do. So it was kind of a lesson, again, in simplicity. Sometimes if you're forcing it or trying to add these additional elements, it actually, the harder thing, I know architects get this, the harder thing often is less is more, you know, to take away and to just focus on the name itself. So this is their old website. It was very academic and detailed, however, not very user-friendly. It wasn't the warm and inviting kind of atmosphere that they wanted to create. With the new website, which is on the next slide, essentially, again, we're bringing in the idea of there was this idea of kind of building this methodical idea behind them. And I think one of and so throughout the website, every single page lands on this like building block kind of collage of images, which really kind of goes along with their brand. Again, it's much more inviting. The colors are dynamic. And then the big thing for them, I think that sets them apart, is that they're very intense thinkers. And so that reflects in their messaging. So rather than just having about us, work, that kind of thing, we took it a step further, and it's, you know, who we are, how we think, what we do, and collaborate with us. And so I think this is an example of what Xylea was saying earlier, where the messaging and how they think really shows through in this kind of different approach of their website and how they talk about themselves. Next slide. So this is their collateral pieces, and I think they actually came up with these collateral pieces, and I think this is just a testament to how powerful a branding guideline helps, because if you notice, like from their original design that they were doing, it was much more geared towards like this grayscale, much less inviting. But when we create logos and branding for our clients, we also provide them with the branding guidelines, which gives them colors and fonts to always use. And you can see here how collective it really came out, even while we were collaborating after I was designing for them. And then the last one that we are going to share is Sebern. Sebern is an engineering firm, and they are the only engineering firm that I've worked with CVG. And that was actually her last name, and it was changing. Her last name was changing, and the group was also growing. So she wanted to move into something, especially as an engineering firm. It was a group of women, and she wanted it to be more fun and more exciting. And again, Xylea and Emily worked really hard to come up with the name Vector Collaborative. Moving on to the next slide. So on the left is the old identity, and she had several different logos she was using, so it was never a cohesive brand. And so that was something we wanted to make sure we helped with her. And then on the right, Carrie, the client that we worked with, she said something really poetic on one of our first calls about how she feels like she was really merging math and science into art. And so Xylea kind of helped craft that into a tagline that was inspired the look and approach that we took for her branding. you know, geometry is a really easy art form that takes a lot of math. And so I really wanted it to be kind of like this pattern that was engaging and hypnotizing, but also mathematic. So you can see here, this is like the black and white version. Again, you need to have that that needs to be the standard. But then moving on to the next slide, you can see that you can then play with it. So these were her business cards, and we actually ordered some really cool embossed where the pattern was actually lifted, so you could like kind of run your finger over, and it was glossy, and it was fun. And again, it was hip and exciting. And how often do you see that for engineering firms? Not that often. And then on the left, we included just kind of different variations, because it's important, again, like you can play with this version on the right that has the pattern on the background, but that's not going to work for every medium. So you need to also think about social media, like how is the icon going to transfer over there, and that kind of thing. And then this was the old website. Again, it had kind of cubes feel. They designed it in-house. It was very simple, but grayscale, black and white. And then we moved into a different direction. The cool thing here, similar to Equiterra, I think that my original idea was that we could actually animate her pattern and have that as a background. But I think that, you know, it's a 2-person firm, and time and budget is always something you have to think about. So we help our clients kind of think outside the box. And one of the ways that we did that for her website was finding some animations that were actually way cooler than what I was thinking about, and illustrated her idea, the idea of the brand and her personality. And also, I think, provide a little bit of a surprise, which is nice to do. I mean, I think that playing with your brand and knowing how to do that and having that flexibility and when to surprise people, whether it's on the website or through social media and all these different ways, is something that we are constantly thinking about. So I think it turned out really well.
So let's talk a little bit about lessons learned, and we're going to tag team this. And the idea with lessons learned is this is a really exciting process. The process and the outcome can really energize firms, and it gives the opportunity to really revisit your culture, your goals, your priorities, reintroduce your firm to the marketplace, remind people that you still exist. So there's a lot of freshness, obviously, that comes from this process. But it's also important to realize that it can bring some challenges, some real challenges. And what we're going to talk about a little bit is ways to avoid unproductive traps. And this isn't meant to discourage you at all. It's meant to help you understand how the process, what to expect, and also how the process can just go more smoothly and be more enjoyable to you. So given all of our years of experience, we put our heads together and really thought, let's have a very open conversation about what we've experienced that's worked and what hasn't worked, and how we can share that with you so it's helpful to you. So next slide, Rita, please. The number one lesson learned we have is to rebrand for the right reasons. I'll give you a few of the wrong reasons and the right reasons. What we've seen is when firms talk about rebranding for the wrong reasons, wrong reasons or unproductive reasons could be a substitution for business development activities. And we have seen this a fair amount, which is, let's throw graphic design at the problem. If we're not getting work, since we're naturally designers, let's try and design our way out of a dry pipeline. And you really need to keep your business development activities ongoing and consistent. As a whole nother webinar, but branding is not a substitution for that. So really be honest with yourself about if that's an issue. Same thing goes for consistent marketing programs. Meaning a lot of firms say, well, nobody knows who we are. We don't have any brand awareness. It's time to rebrand. And if you're not doing anything in the marketing realm to increase brand awareness, it's not about the brand. It's about your marketing activities. And so be realistic with yourself about that. And also, some firms can do this as a morale boost, and it's almost like an internal reset. to improve firm culture. And it's always important to acknowledge when you need a morale boost and an internal reset, but at a brand that is so externally facing, you don't want to use it for that purpose. You want to use a different tool for that purpose. That's just some things to look out for. And some of the right reasons to consider rebranding is a combination of a few things. Either your brand just isn't serving you, it doesn't reflect who you are. You maybe are having a leadership transition, new principals are coming into the mix and or retiring. Perhaps you're changing your overall growth strategy or entering new markets or geographies. I know, for example, there's a firm in New England called New England Medical Design. I have not worked on their branding. I don't know what they're doing right now, but for example, if that firm decided to go into residential work, they might need some branding work, just hypothetically. An outdated or non-memorable identity. A lot of firms kind of run into this, and definitely firms that have initials as their name, and there's nothing wrong with that. And a lot of very strong brands have those, but sometimes complicated sets of initials are a little bit hard to remember. So a strong brand can help improve that situation. Sometimes the brand isn't done intentionally in the first place, and that's certainly true with younger firms where maybe they just started their practice quickly and on a shoestring budget and just needed to get to work on their first project and named it after themselves and threw something together. And then 5 years later, does that really reflect who they are authentically? Or is there an opportunity to, as they get to know firm better and evolve, is there an opportunity to really reflect that? As we saw with Cube and in their situation, there was a confusion in the marketplace with a firm that had a similar name. Other firms sometimes have major life changes like a divorce or a relocation where their name literally changes and they need to rebrand due to that. And a combination of just all or some of the above. And if we go to the next slide, I think understanding the problem you're trying to solve is really, really important. As designers, you know more than anybody that it's about framing the right problem, right? You have to be solving the right problem. And you often work with your clients to say, okay, the program might not be about what you think it is. You might have to arrive at a different solution. So, is it truly a branding problem? Do you need a full rebrand? Do you just need a brand refresh? Do you need some colors? Do you need a little logo tweak? Do you need a new name or not? Is it really just messaging work that you need? Do you need just a tagline and maybe just a clearer firm description on your site? The most important thing is to understand how you're positioned in the marketplace and knowing where you want to be positioned in the marketplace. And the brand is a key tool that can help you get there. And you need to really be thinking about how can your brand help you get there, right? So sometimes you see brands that need more sophistication or need more authority or need a style change, either more contemporary or more traditional. So really understanding what you're trying to achieve and communicate. So what we recommend to help frame that problem is developing a creative brief with all decision makers. So, and we do this with firms often, is just really help them dig into the problem that's meant to be solved through graphic design. And often firms need objectivity in the development of a creative brief. So that's where we step in. But the brief should be exactly that, brief, a short statement of what the branding work really needs to achieve. I mean, do you need a new name? Do you need a tagline? It's a good place to state mission, vision, value proposition. It's a good time to look at your competitive environment and see, who you're running up against or who you might be running up against in the future. Really think about your desired positioning and be very honest with yourself about why the current brand isn't working. And if you need to ask, people outside of, your just the firm leadership, staff or very close clients or something like that, do that, because developing the creative brief will serve you well, the foundation of the process. If you have multiple partners, make sure everybody signs off on the brief and is in agreement about the problem that needs to be solved. And then you can present that creative brief to a graphic designer you choose to work with. And that'll really start the conversation in a really honest and productive way.
So after you understand what the problem is, it's very important to understand who your target audience is. So helpful hint, it's not other architects. So this is a very important thing to keep in mind when you're doing branding, marketing, or business development, is to really analyze who your target audience is. So many architects design their own brand or website with themselves or their colleagues in mind. Like, I like blue, I'm gonna make my website blue, but they're not really thinking about what their target clients might resonate with. So also, I mean, you wanna make sure your brand is appealing, attractive, and compelling to your exact target clients. Also with messaging, you wanna make sure your messaging is written so it sounds like you're speaking directly to your target audience and their needs, their pain points. So when you're looking at your current website, your current marketing collateral, you know, you can ask yourself, is there a lot of ARCA speak that is confusing or too technical, or maybe just uninteresting to homeowners, developers, facility managers, or whomever your exact target audience may be? So as designers, you know, you often go through design school with like-minded people, but then when you get out, half the things you might be saying about your work might not make sense to your clients, who are most likely not architects themselves. Yeah, so once you identify your target audience, and that could be multiple audiences, you know, we work with firms that do private residential work, and they do public school design work, and they might even do hospitality. So you might have multiple audiences, but you still want to keep those exact people in mind through your messaging and your brand identity. So once you identify your target audience or audiences, we highly recommend having someone outside of your firm review your brand identity options if you're in that point where you're kind of choosing between different brand identities, and also to review your messaging or content. So we do recommend, you know, you can either work with a copywriter or copy editor who's familiar with architecture specifically, or someone in your industry but outside of your firm, because you really want someone who can be objective. And like Emily said earlier, when in doubt, try to ask some of your favorite clients for their feedback on that. And then also keep in mind your brand attributes and if they're attracting the right clients. So if your clients are more traditional, maybe they're in finance or law or healthcare, versus more modern, such as the tech industry, that will greatly affect the visuals and messaging that you want to use in your brand. And also think about your brand words. Do you want to be seen as trustworthy and approachable, innovative and cerebral, or fun and creative, like the engineering firm we saw earlier? So our next point is to make sure that you commit to the time, energy, and cost that a proper rebrand will require. A lot of people, especially if they're hiring or working with a brand designer or a brand design firm, might think that it's going to be minimal effort on their part. But no matter who you hire, no matter who you work with, no matter how competent they are, there's going to be a lot of time and energy on your part that's required. And you know, we think that your brand is your business's calling card. It touches everything you do. It's a foundational element that serves the rest of your business. So you want to make sure you get it right, ideally the first time. So it's not really the place to skimp or the process to rush. So yeah, like we've seen a lot of people underestimate the amount of time and energy it will take to gather materials and content on their end. So I'm just going to cover briefly some things you might expect to be working on, even if you hire a firm to help you. So when you're going through a branding process, expect to spend many hours thinking about and providing the following items. So your target audience profile or avatar. If you're changing your firm name, any ideas you may have for the new name. Your core firm values, which can influence the visual identity and the messaging that you use. Professional photography of your best and favorite projects. And Lisa usually recommends 10 to 20 top projects on your site maximum, but make sure you have great photos of those. Project descriptions, if you wish to include those on your site. Team bios, very important, personal favorite of mine. And blog posts, white papers, or other outlets for thought leadership. These will all take you a lot of time to gather and you might want to be refreshing some of these items as well. So just, giving you kind of a forewarning. So your graphic designer cannot make these things up for you. And the main point is that the longer it takes you to gather all these items, the longer the branding process could be stalled. And we want you to avoid that kind of frustration. So just understand there will be a sizable time commitment from you.
So number 5 is prioritize quality over quantity. And this is especially true when deciding on what you're going to share on your website or in collateral. We tell firms all the time that, and this is essentially a quote, that your website is not a repository for everything that you've ever done. The goal is to get people to call you. So it's really important that you kind of curate, the look and the design of what you're sharing through the website, through your collateral. And then this also goes for writing. So often our clients will send us 5 paragraphs that they want to go on the about page. And the reality is people just don't read that amount of writing. There's a lot of best practices in terms of copy on your website. Often people say no more than 2 paragraphs per page. And so really kind of thinking through, that doesn't mean that you can't break rules occasionally, but just making sure that it's intentional and that you're making sure there's a reason behind it. Because if it's just you're just kind of copying and pasting something that was written 10 years ago and it doesn't necessarily even apply, it's not going to serve you in the long run. And then number 6, err on the side of simplicity. I kind of touched on this earlier when talking about ThoughtCraft. I think that this is especially true for architects. Your work should be kind of the hero in each scenario. So you don't want your branding to compete with that. And so that could mean not having loud colors or not having a ton of graphical elements. The collateral should really showcase your work. The website should also showcase your work. It doesn't need to have a ton of bells and whistles to get across that you are modern. I think that all the graphics should kind of take a backseat to your work.
And this is a tricky one, and we've all experienced this to some degree, and that's recognize that complicated interpersonal dynamics can happen between partners, and decision making can be problematic. And trying to make it as objective as possible will really serve you well. And this is totally understandable. I mean, every partnership has its complications and its strengths, and I've experienced this multiple times in the past on rebrands, that the brand is very, very personal to the small business owner. And I'm sure you likely feel that way about your brands too. And rebranding can bring out conflicts and alliances with partnerships. And just be prepared for that, and just come to it with an open mind and really listen to everybody's perspectives on branding, because a brand is, especially with a startup, it's in a smaller firm, it's really the firm's baby, and most partners have a different relationship to it. So it's important to really understand that going in, especially if the brand includes one of the original founders' names, and you're either moving away from that somehow, either adding names or moving to a non-name, non-formal name-based identity. And perfectly fine for firm principals to say, okay, I'm ready to do that and let's do it. But it's also, they're giving something up. If you're defining the branding goals and objectives in a very clear, way, then you don't need to have every decision be a personal preference-based decision. Granted, you want everybody to love your brand, but like Zayla said about Le Bleu, we often talk about this. We say, well, you can literally get into these conversations where one partner's saying I like blue and the other partner's saying I don't like blue. And the real question is blue the right color to suit the brand goals? If we laid out the brand goals, we can look at the creative brief. Is blue the best answer to that problem? Or what are the alternatives? And that just takes it out of the personal. it takes the conversation out of the personal. So there has to be somebody who is in charge of driving this forward. And this could be an administrator. And I've played this role in administrative context in the past. But it really is important that this person is empowered to crack the whip and that people listen to this person, because yeah, they're really they have the firm's best interest in mind and the best interest of the process in mind, and they need to be heard. They need to be effective. I have experience when partners or even a solo principal can't make a decision, or maybe are trying to avoid a difficult conversation or some kind of a conflict that's decision-based, that just nothing happens, and the process grinds to a halt. And that's what this kind of the champion can help make sure doesn't happen. It's, you know, we really need to get together. We really need to make this decision to move this process forward, because momentum needs to continue for everybody's sake. You know, for the designer's sake, for your sake as a firm owner, for you know, just for the disruption of the whole thing. It really needs to get done. As you'll see, a lot of things get put on hold. Oh, we won't announce that until the rebrand. You know, so you really have to keep that in mind. So the champion's responsibilities in general could be, or should be, setting deadlines and meeting times, and making sure everybody does their homework and comes prepared, has reviewed any materials they need to, and comes to the meeting, you know, with what they are required to ensure a productive meeting environment happens. And I know this sounds pretty basic, but making sure that you know, they've got a quiet conference room where they can, you know, have important conversations, you know, plenty of coffee. Some, you know, the visuals are set up if they need to look at something on the screen. You know, so you're really using you're not wasting the principal's time. You know, you're really making this the most efficient as it can be, and also just setting the stage for a productive conversation. And also, this is a big one, trying to keep distractions at bay. You know, everybody's on their phone, everybody's talking to a client, everybody's, you know, writing emails on their phones, but these are important conversations, and, you know, you really only have them a few times really in the history of your firm. So it's really important for everybody to be engaged. So the champion's also a liaison between the graphic designer and the firm leaders. So there are a lot of assets that change hands and questions that need to be answered, and this person makes sure that the ball doesn't get dropped on either side. And there's just tons of information exchange, as Leah said, with you know, all the components of a new website and a brand. This person would be in charge of making sure that happens, that all those assets were exchanged in a timely manner.
Okay, so number 9 is deliver feedback constructively. This is mostly in if you're working, I mean, I guess if you're also working in-house, this could apply, but really just whoever's in charge of doing this, I think that it's really important to come to the table with not only, you know, thought through ideas of what you imagine, but also visual examples. We've had a lot of firms that tell us, I don't like it, and they don't really have a reason why, or they can't really express beyond that. We get it needs to be more flashy. And again, that it's really hard to translate this type of feedback. Again, it's really hard to really get to the root of what these firms are getting at. And I think it's totally fair to not like the direction, and it's fair to kind of have discussions around that. I think that just also remember that there needs to be some thought that's put into how that feedback is delivered so that it's constructive, and then also it keeps the process moving forward. Another thing here is to just be cautious of the design by committee, which is really just asking a huge quantity of different people for feedback. And then the last one is to trust the experts. So, you know, whether it's that you working outside of your firm, I think that if you are to seek out expert help, definitely trust us. That's kind of what we do and what we're here for. We've learned a lot about the process and where people get hung up and where decisions get difficult. And that's kind of what has helped guide us and to create the processes that we've created. So a pretty good metaphor is that if for architecture firms, if clients want to jump around and all of a sudden do something before you know it's time to do that, you can see that's not going to work. And that's kind of how we work as well. We've really kind of fine-tuned our process through making mistakes and learning along the way. But that's kind of like, that's again, that's what we're here for. So if you do decide to work in-house, I think it's also important to recognize that it is going to be a huge time commitment as well. And you may or may not, you might be learning along the way, and there may be mistakes that come along with that.
So yeah, let's take some questions.
All right. Well, Emily, I have a couple of questions for you, and I'm not sure which one of you might want to answer this, but excuse me. The first one is what recommendations do you have for sole practitioners? Is some of what you said overkill for, you know, a solo person?
Go ahead, Leah, if you can do that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that kind of very complex design in some of these that you've seen, it might be overkill, meaning you might not need such a robust website, but every single company and sole practitioner has to have a brand. So if you're using your name as your brand name, you still need to have some kind of visual identity. You probably need to have a website. You need to have business cards. So no matter what size firm you are, you do need to have a strong brand identity. So again, maybe not such a robust website with, you know, 25 different projects on it, but you still need to have, you have a brand one way or another. And for you to drive that brand is the best thing you can do. Mm-hmm. So I hope I answered that. And if you have any more, please just add to your question.
Yeah, I would also say that it might not be necessary to have a fully developed creative brief if you're a sole practitioner. I think you just have to, this could be back of the envelope. You just have to jot down a few things that the brand needs to accomplish and represent. And then as you're designing it, which you might even be doing yourself, if you are a designer and have graphic capabilities, that you can do that without having to write the whole brief up, I think. And I think Lisa would agree with that you could approach it as much more pared down process.
Yeah, I was just going to add that Vector Collaborative is actually just a team of 2 people. So it's a good example. Her website is 4 pages total. So she definitely doesn't have a huge robust, or there's not a ton of overkill or information out there, but I still think that there's opportunity to kind of play and have fun with your branding.
Well, the next 2 questions are related. And the first one is, if a firm is named after a founding partner, is changing the name to reflect new partners a good reason to change the name? And sort of related to that are, you know, what are the risks in the name change? And what can be done to mitigate those risks?
In terms of the partners changing, that's always a tough one. We like to think that as brands and firms are evolving, that you're starting to get away from the name based, especially if you have multiple names, that you're starting to move away from that as you transition. And some firms, pick one name and then say collaborative or in partners or what, just to simplify that, because we all know that a lot of firm names, especially if there's like a string of 4 or 5, can really sound like a law firm, and it just simplifies it and it's a really good opportunity to say, okay, you know what, we've added a new partner. We are now known as, a non-proper noun-based name. We see that a lot. We help firms do that a lot, and we encourage that. Do you guys want to add to the name-based conversation at all?
Yeah, I would. We have an example. So one of our investment partners has been around for 40 plus years. It was founded by a very famous architect in Seattle named Henry Klein. And, you know, his name and his work was quite famous in the Pacific Northwest. And the firm partners that came in and eventually became principals and ended up becoming partners, they wanted to keep his legacy alive and his ethos of sustainability and craftsmanship. So they didn't want to lose his name entirely when he passed away. He retired and passed away. But also he wasn't there anymore. So keeping it Henry Klein didn't really make sense. So now they're known as HKP, Henry Klein Partnership. So, you know, they call themselves HKP architects, and they talk about the history of the firm on the site. But it's not front and center anymore. Front and center is them and what they do now. But I think that's a really good example of how you can do that, especially if the person was quite well known and did really great work. You know, keeping something in the name is a great idea. And then just another example is one we already covered today, Vector Collaborative. It was Sebern Structural Engineering because that was her last name. But as she hired a second person and she hopes to hire more in the future, it made sense to change the name to Vector Collaborative, meaning, you know, it is a collaborative firm. It's not just one person.
And I was just going to add, as far as what we do to mitigate those risks, I think there's just kind of a list of back-end things that we often, when we launch a new firm with a new name, we make sure that social media, you know, there's a ton of information out there. There's blog posts when you land on the page, redirection of all of your old pages to the new pages with an explanation on the home page. There's definitely a list of things that you can do for users to not be confused when all of a sudden they go to Sebern Structural Engineering and they're redirected to a brand new name. So we try to mitigate those risks in those ways.
Yeah, that's a good, PR is a really good way to do that as well. Just your overall communications, whether that's, you know, obviously you would put a letter out or a message out, email out to everybody you know, and then with that, hopefully get some PR and make sure your social media is on top of it. Write a blog post for explaining the reason for the name change. We find that that's really helpful because it's a very kind of forward-thinking way of expressing where your firm is, you know, where your vision is for the firm. It provides that opportunity. And it also provides an opportunity to get in front of your entire mailing list, again, with a very good reason. And you had asked about risks with the name change. And I would say not doing it too often. If firms do that every few years, you start to wonder what's going on. And that's not enough time for a brand to really get any traction. So that's important. It's also, I think, you really need to look at the timing of, you know, where you are in the trajectory of firm growth. And Rena could probably speak about this a little bit with the stair step, you know, that firms tend to, you know, achieve growth, plateau for a little bit, achieve a different kind of growth, plateau. And we like to think it's close to that plateau where a rebrand would happen and not in the middle of a giant growth spurt. That's a good way to look at it, you know, before you're about to push a major campaign or before you're about to do something huge like move or whatever, that might be a good time to do branding work.
Here's a question about a firm that's done a big brand refresh over the last couple of years, and he's asking how you recommend, you know, kind of evaluating a brand regularly in relation to their mission, and you know, how do you do that without kind of wasting all the work that you've done in a big brand refresh, but you want to keep it relevant over time? Do you have any recommendations about that?
That's a good question for Xylia, I think.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it kind of depends again on understanding the problem, which is one of Emily's slides. So I would say, what do you need to refine and why? So if you're talking about the brand identity, it sounds like you did a lot of work already. So is it a logo tweak, or is it, you know, a color tweak, or is it just a website? You know, maybe you want a new page on your website, or maybe you want to refine the home page. But if it's a messaging issue, then I would say work with a writer, either an outside copywriter, or if you have a marketing person, work with them to refresh your mission statement if that's what you think needs to be updated. Because yeah, your mission can change. Maybe you want to pursue different market types or a different geographical region. And so you do want to look at your messaging quite frequently. So again, I would just define the problem first and then go from there.
Yeah. We also do brand audits for firms. So that might be something that could be worthwhile. And what's helpful with that is, you know, we come in objectively and really as an objective third party. And we talk a little bit about what I like to do is look at the website and make my initial observations and then come to a meeting and say, this is what I think you're like. As a neutral person who just went on your website, and this is what I think your values are, and this is what I'm gathering from what I'm reading. Is this correct? And then, and where is there any divergence there, and what is it? I think that's really helpful. It's helpful to ask neutral third parties, and it's also helpful to ask your clients. You know, again, we all have clients that are very close to us, and we can just say, hey, could you just give this site a once over? Does this sound like me? Does this sound like your working experience with us? And just kind of get feedback that way. But I do think it's certainly a really smart thing to be thinking about, and not in the context of I'm going to rebrand every few years, which I'm sure you don't want to do, but in the context of, are there any small subcomponents of this that aren't working that we can improve? Like, as Ilea said, the messaging. You know, maybe it's a different background color. Maybe it's, you know, maybe the proposals need updating. Maybe the proposal template isn't fully there. And that's what an audit does. It says, you send us all of your marketing materials and we look for inconsistencies, and we look and make sure everything is kind of working in concert together. Did you have anything to add, Lisa, to that?
No, I think that
Okay.
covers it, yeah.
Well, this, I believe maybe last question is for you, Lisa, and it's about color. What's your stance on the use of color in a logo? Our firm currently has 4 unique colors, but the partners have expressed concern that losing colors using the colors will somehow detract from the brand. Using that many colors makes it so difficult when ordering things like t-shirts, giveaways, business cards, etc. But I'm sorry, I misread that. The partners have expressed concern that losing the colors will detract from the brand. So what's your opinion about that?
Yeah, my thoughts is 4 colors is a challenge to work with, especially for an architecture firm. I typically don't go over 2 colors and normally just go with 1 major color. But that being said, I don't think that it means that it can't be done. What comes to mind for me is that, especially when you're saying the t-shirts and the business cards, if you remember with Equiterra branding, we had 6 colors, that 1 was water, 1 was tree, 1 was rock. And one way we worked with that is you rarely saw all of those colors together. And mostly it was, so when we ordered a pack of business cards, for example, we alternated between all of those different colors and different backgrounds. So some clients would see the rock, some people would see the trees, some people would see the stone. And then occasionally you would see it all in conjunction together in a collateral packet, for example, where each section had its own different color. So I guess something that comes to mind is there are ways where you can use it all in conjunction as a part of the logo, but then you don't always need to use all 4 colors. I think that it also could be a cool kind of fun element of surprise, and again, playing and surprising your users to, you go to one page on the website and it's one color, and then you go to the next page and it's a different color. I think there's ways that you can use the colors without having to use them all together, is the way that, or what comes to mind without seeing it. But I have seen it work. We do have one client that has 4 colors, and they're 4 muted colors, which makes it a little bit less challenging. But
who is that? Help me.
Zaga.
Memory. Okay. Yeah.
It's 4 blocks, and it's 4 different colors. Yeah.
Great. Well, any other questions? That's the last one that's written in so far. So just giving anyone else a chance. I guess that's it. Well, thanks so much. It's very informative.
Great. Yeah, thanks. And don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. We're happy to answer them and jump on a call. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.